There is a watch that appears in more rap videos than any other timepiece in history. It has been gifted to heads of state, worn by astronauts, and survived the wreck of the Titanic. It is the single most recognized luxury object on the planet. If you walk into a room full of genuinely wealthy people wearing one, there's a reasonable chance they will quietly, privately think less of you for it. This is the Rolex paradox. The watch that became so successful, it started repelling the exact people it was designed to impress. And understanding how that happened reveals something uncomfortable about status, aspiration, and the strange social machinery that turns luxury into liability. To understand why a Rolex became a problem, you first need to understand why it became a phenomenon. This was not a brand built on heritage, aristocratic patronage, or Swiss watchmaking tradition. Rolex was built on one thing, executed with almost frightening consistency for over a century. Marketing. Hans Wilsdorf founded Rolex in London in 1905. He was 24 years old, German-born, and completely uninterested in the technical craft of watchmaking. He did not make movements. He bought movements from Swiss suppliers, placed them in cases, and then spent every available resource convincing the world they were the finest watches ever created. In 1927, he waterproofed a watch and had a British swimmer wear it across the English Channel, then timed the press release to land on the front page of the London Daily Mail. In 1953, a Rolex was on Edmund Hillary's wrist when he reached the summit of Everest. In 1960, a specially modified Rolex descended to the deepest point in the ocean. Wilsdorf didn't make watches, he manufactured mythology, and the mythology worked so completely that within a few decades, Rolex had done something almost no brand in history had managed. It had made a single product into the universal shorthand for success, and that, precisely, is where the trouble started. For most of the 20th century, owning a Rolex meant you had made it. A Rolex Submariner, a Rolex Datejust, a Rolex Daytona, these were objects that announced arrival. Surgeons bought them after their first year of practice. Lawyers bought them after making partner. Executives bought them to mark promotions. The watch functioned as a punctuation mark at the end of a life sentence of hard work. You wore it to tell people you had earned something. The problem is that this made Rolex aspirational to an enormous number of people, and when enough people aspire to the same object, the object changes what it means. By the 1990s and the early 2000s, hip-hop had adopted Rolex completely. Rappers wore them stacked on their wrists, they referenced them in lyrics, and they gifted them to collaborators and rivals alike. This was not incidental. For artists who had grown up with nothing, a Rolex was the most legible symbol of the distance they had traveled. It said, "I came from somewhere very specific, and I am no longer there." This cultural adoption was genuinely exciting for Rolex's sales figures. It was quietly catastrophic for Rolex's social function among the ultra-wealthy. Because here is the core problem with the status symbol: it only works if it is exclusive. The moment an object becomes available to or associated with a wide enough range of people, the people at the very top of the social ladder begin looking for something else. Not because they are cruel, though that is part of it, but because the signal has been corrupted. A watch that means I made it is useful when only a handful of people can send that signal. When millions of people are sending it, it stops communicating anything specific at all. By the 2010s, something interesting was happening in the most expensive restaurants, the most serious boardrooms, the genuinely rarefied social environments where true financial power concentrates. The Rolex was disappearing. In its place came watches that most people had never heard of: Patek Philippe, A. Lang & Son, F.P. Journe, Richard Mille, brands with no flagship stores in airports, no advertisements in mainstream magazines. Watches that cost not tens of thousands but hundreds of thousands of dollars, made in quantities so limited that owning one required either deep personal connections to the brand or a waiting list measured in years. These watches were not more accurate than a Rolex. They were not more durable. In purely functional terms, a Rolex Submariner tells time better than most of them. But functionality was never the point. The point was a signal that only people already inside a certain world could read, and that, for the genuinely wealthy, was the whole value. This dynamic has a name. Economists call it Veblen goods, products that become more desirable as their price increases because the price itself is the feature. The luxury market understood this instinctively for centuries. What the Rolex story illustrates is the flip side. A Veblen good stops working when too many people can access it. When the signal escapes its intended audience, the wealthy do not try to fix the signal. They abandon it entirely and find a new one. Which brings us to the Rolex waitlist and what happened when Rolex accidentally made its own problem worse. In the late 2010s, certain Rolex models, particularly the steel sports watches, the Submariner, the GMT Master, and the Daytona, became essentially impossible to buy at retail. Production constraints, genuine or managed, meant authorized dealers had no stock. If you wanted one, you either paid a secondary market premium of 50%, sometimes 100% above retail, or you cultivated a relationship with the dealer and waited. This should have been good for Rolex's prestige. Scarcity creates desire, but what actually happened was more complicated. The waitlist turned Rolexes into investments. People bought them not to wear, but to flip. The secondary market became a financial instrument, and a watch that functions as a commodity is a watch that has completed its transformation from status symbol to something more ambiguous, simultaneously overexposed and overpriced, worn loudly by people signaling aspiration and quietly avoided by people who have moved past needing to signal anything at all. There's a specific kind of wealthy person who understands this acutely. The old money inheritor who has never needed to announce anything. The founder who built something worth billions and finds the entire performance of wealth slightly embarrassing. The serious collector who has spent years learning that the most interesting watches are almost never the ones everyone recognizes. These people do not dislike Rolex because it is bad. They dislike what wearing one communicates about your relationship to status, that you are still playing the game, that you still care what the people in the room think when they glance at your wrist, that you have not yet reached the altitude where such things stop mattering. The watch you choose in these environments is a test you did not know you were taking. And here is the genuinely interesting part. Rolex knows all of this. They have always known it. The company is extraordinarily private, obsessively controlled, and run not by a corporation, but by a foundation, with no shareholders and no obligation to grow. They do not chase trends, they do not respond to criticism, they have watched their watch become a meme, a status symbol for 3 different generations with completely different ideas about what status means, and they have not changed a single thing about how they operate. Because the people who stopped buying Rolex were never really their core customer. Their core customer is the person who just made partner, the surgeon after their first year, the executive who got the promotion, the person for whom a Rolex is still a punctuation mark, still the most legible symbol of arrival that exists. That customer is not going anywhere. There are always more people arriving, and the Rolex is always there to mark the moment. The truly wealthy moved on to watches nobody recognizes, but in doing so, they created a new vacuum at the top that other brands rushed to fill, which means in 10 or 20 years, those brands will face exactly the same problem. The signal will get out, the wrong people will start wearing it, and the genuinely wealthy will find something new that only they can read. This is how status works. It is not a ladder you climb to a fixed destination. It is an escalator that keeps moving, demanding that everyone at the top take another step upward just to stay in place. Your Rolex might make rich people cringe, but that cringe is not really about the watch. It is about the ancient and exhausting human need to sort each other into categories, to find objects that whisper the right things to the right people while remaining invisible to everyone else. The Rolex got too loud, so the people for whom silence is the ultimate luxury went somewhere quieter. They always do.